the next thing I know, I was thrown onto the ground, and I heard, "Please, please, freeze, freeze. This is a raid. This is a state police." So I was subdued on the ground with a gun to my head, and then men in full riot gear with AR-15s swept through my house, and then they left, and I was sitting there. And then at that point, they said, "Okay, do you have any drugs on you?"
Welcome, beautiful thinkers. This is an interview with Sterlin Lujan, known as the Psychologic Anarchist, also known as a public speaker in the Bitcoin space, working on Bitcoin exchanges and trying to promote that technology to take advantage of its potential to possibly reduce violence in the world. Now, this episode, the previous interview that I did with Sterlin was about how he explored the revelatory power of the substance MDMA, having a peak experience himself, a revelation about his love for himself and others, empathy for himself and others, going on to try to explore that dimension of the substance and trying to recreate that experience in others, eventually leading him to becoming a vendor and a dealer of these substances. And that's where we get into this interview. That's where the story picks up again. And in this case, the challenge is about the trauma when he was finally arrested. So remember to check out sterlinlujan.com. That's where you can find his information, his posts. And of course, check out beautifulpodcast.com. That's where you can find more information about my podcast, A Beautiful Thought, that you're listening to right now. Please subscribe. Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Ruppa Podcasts, any podcasts, any podcast app, Podcast Addict. That's a good one I like to use. And let's begin.
This is A Beautiful Thought.
I'm here again with Sterlin Lujan, and he's going to tell us the follow-up to the previous episode, the story about what happened when he was dealing drugs or selling certain substances, and what happened with the legal issues that he got into there. How are you, Sterlin?
I am doing fantastic, Kurt. It's good to see you again.
Yeah.
Good to be back.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So you were in that situation where you were distributing drugs to friends. Like it started off just as a kind of passion project, I guess, where you're trying to bring people personal revelations and that kind of thing. But then it somehow turned into a business. How did that transformation happen?
Yeah, it was really gradual, Kurt. It wasn't it wasn't a conscious thing necessarily at the beginning, because it was more of a quasi shamanic endeavor where I really wanted to help wake people up. It was I was kind of a therapist sort of in my own way.
Yeah.
But then, because at first it started with my friends, naturally it proceeded to my friends' friends also wanting to get in on the action. And at that point, it required me to procure more drugs, more MDMA, so that I could help those folks as well. And of course, at this point in time, I'm not able to. I can't just give away all these drugs free. Might as well make some money off of it in the process. So I started giving out MDMA to these folks, and it got to the point, of course, where I wasn't doing I think I mentioned I was doing the sessions at my house where we would all get together and we would have this shared experience on MDMA where we would talk about highly philosophical subjects, matters of life and death, existence, philosophy, etc. It morphed from that, though, of course. I couldn't do that wake-up process with everyone, but I would give a little bit of a spiel when I would sell MDMA to somebody. I would say, hey, listen, if you've never done this before, this is an amazing experience. You want to make sure you have the proper set and setting, and you want to remember to explore your your psyche, your past, your traumas, and also your personal history. And it's very possible you could come up with some different ideas about your life and your future, and also possibly have one of those quantum personality shifts, really have a moment of clarity and that Zen Satori moment and wake up. So yeah, it became a business really, but it was also still the original motivations were still there, right? I still wanted to help wake people up, but I couldn't have a personal encounter with every single person that I sold it to.
Yeah. Did you ever think about like printing off pamphlets or something like these are some things to think about?
Yeah, that's a good question. Kurt, during the time, it's a humorous question, but the truth is, no, I unfortunately never really thought about that. But because I had this goal in mind, in retrospect, that wouldn't have been a bad idea. Like, here, take this, learn about and understand everything about what you're getting into and what you're putting into your body and how it can help change you. But no, I was sort of caught up in the moment at the time. I was in. You got to remember this kind of lifestyle. It also has a life of its own. It kind of takes you for a ride. It's a very alluring lifestyle because people who deal drugs oftentimes have power, right, and power over people. So and this is a fault I'm admitting of my own. I let that power go to my head. I was enjoying more relationships with women at the time as a result of doing this. I was more popular, and I actually had people who would help protect me in case things got potentially violent. So I very much was doing a drug dealer kind of role, but I also still had the mindset that I want to keep waking people up as much as possible. So but doing this kind of stuff, naturally, you're going to get into the quote unquote drug dealing type of territory where you have to try to protect yourself and your interests, because on the black market, you can't rely on the state or any other organization to protect your interests. You have to protect them yourself.
Yes. So what would you call that state of mind, like that you said about power over people and you let it go to your head? Like, is it just a big ego, or is it even, would you call it hubris, or how would you describe it?
Yeah, probably a bit of both, right? Because I definitely got an enlarged ego. Bear in mind, I started to do other drugs, this is a mistake, right? I started to use cocaine from time to time as well. And I was
high on your own supply.
Yeah, that's right. And yes, I was taking MDMA still, and I was drinking quite heavily at the time as well. So my thinking started to get muddled and cloudy. And personally, from an individual choice, I can do that if I want to. And I think anybody should have the right to do that and to make mistakes. That's just part of being human. But in the end, it was a mistake because it caused me not to think correctly. And I did lose a little sight of my early mission because so many people got involved, and then I had to start protecting my interests. So the focal point kind of shifted. Nonetheless, I still, as much as I could during the time, still reminded people of what MDMA is good for. But naturally, when you start doing this, because you start worrying about yourself and protecting yourself and your interests, things will shift naturally anyway as a consequence of that.
Yes. Well, that's I think that speaks well of your nature in some way, because it's like this sweet part of you that still remembered, even though you were getting swept up in all this crazy life and the drugs and women and everything, you still kept that little bit of focus. Like, hey, there was a bold or a noble intention behind this. It's something wonderful that other people could improve their lives and have a perspective about self-love.
Yes, and get this, Kurt, this whole thing, everything that happened, it wasn't like a linear process, right? It wasn't like it wasn't just like I gradually just turned into this or morphed into this other person, because I was still thinking about these other things, especially in times when I wasn't busy or wasn't selling a lot. I would think, man, I still did all the reading that I usually do. I still thought, man, I gotta get back to the original ethos that I had in mind for what this stuff is going to help people with. So there was a real circularity to it where I would think about what I needed to be doing, and I would realize very consciously that I had gotten swept up in a lifestyle, and it was affecting my original intentions and motivations. And there was even times, because this was over like a 3 or 4 year process when all this was happening, and there were times when I would take, actually, I had people in my life at the time who said, "Hey, listen, you're getting caught up in this. You're turning into kind of a dick. Maybe it's time to take a step back." And so I listened to those folks, and I did. I stopped doing it for like I would stop doing it for like 6 months at a time. I would take a break, but of course they were also worried about, you're eventually going to get fucking caught doing this, right? Anyone who deals drugs, at some point it all catches up to you, right? So this is how it kind of happened, or how it took place, where I didn't gradually turn into a complete asshole. I was very, very aware of my own pitfalls and my own handicaps. And honestly, this is an important time to take a step back and re-examine MDMA. It was originally the MDMA that brought me to this point. So its effects were still working on me, even as I started to change my lifestyle and make these sort of mishaps. I would also come back to the MDMA, that center point, and that crucible, and realize I need to re-examine my life and maybe try something else, right? Or take a break, or remember where I originally came from.
Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting, that even in that wild state, or the wild lifestyle, that MDMA could actually ground you a little bit.
Yeah, it always seems that, even to this day and age, it always seems to come back to me, that initial experience, because it was so powerful in changing the course of my life and allowing me to think about what I wanted to do with my life and what direction I wanted to go. It still has that enduring impact, and it's been so important, even during times in my life where I make mistakes, or I think, man, maybe I'm not going in the right direction. Maybe I need to think about correcting bad habits or those kind of things. The MDMA experience always comes back up, and I think, what is the purpose of my own life, and how do I provide it meaning without bringing other people down with me, or becoming something I don't feel like I was meant to become?
Yeah, well, it's so powerful. Like those words you said to me in the interview a few weeks ago, that thing, or that voice inside of you saying, "I'm beautiful. The world is beautiful. I have more potential. I'm smarter than I've dared to ever say to myself." I think about those words a lot. Like, even when I'm in meditation, I'm like, that's something. That's something really cool.
Yeah, and you're right, sort of that mantra that I had at the time, that is one of the main sticking points, right? That I knew that I could become more than I was at the time. And so when I think I'm misstepping, I can return to myself and say, listen, this is not the path that I chose for myself after I learned about who I was while on MDMA. And so, yeah, it does come back in a spark that says, let's right this wrong course and make sure the path is clear before me, and that I can take the one that matters and that counts.
Let me ask you something about the feeling of ego, or hubris, or power going to your head. Can you describe what it feels like in your body, or even in your head, I guess?
Yeah, it almost feels kind of like the cocaine rush, where you feel like you have that S on your chest, and that you become kind of like a superhero. And also, this probably plays into the fact that I was young at the time. I was in my mid-20s, younger, we'll say. I was in my mid-20s, and so I already had that feeling of invincibility, right? And adding this lifestyle on top of it gave me this real feeling of power, and this notion that I could really do anything that I wanted, and I know nobody can fuck with me because there are people who are going to hurt them if they do. And there's ways that I can actually manage my life to a higher degree than other people can. Plus, I had all this extra money rolling in from the sales, so it was a real powerful feeling that gave me a real sense of entitlement for the lifestyle and for what I was doing. And it was, I don't know if that necessarily describes a bodily feeling other than that sensation that there's some kind of deranged superhero inside of me, or some super villain even.
Yeah, well, I guess the feeling of cocaine in your body, it can be like you're full of energy, like you're ready to leap up at any moment. Maybe there's even not exactly anxiety, but like a bubbly excitement in your belly, that kind of thing.
Yeah, there was a real rush to it for sure. And I remember at the time and this is all in the few years following the MDMA experience, I remember just thinking a lot about my own mortality. And I do to this day. And that's something that these chemicals inspire, is this thought that we're not here on this plane of existence forever, and that our life will be extinguished at some point. So we really need to take risks. We need to live as fully and as humanly as possible and push into the future with some goals and some intentionality. And it's through that process that we are able to learn and to change. And in a way, we enter into what Joseph Campbell called the hero's journey, where we start to take risks that at the time are not only dangerous, but can potentially endanger other people. And it's through that process that we learn more about who we are. And we also encounter people along the way that help us out and help us realize the errors of our ways, and that help us grow. Like Luke Skywalker meets Obi-Wan Kenobi and then meets Yoda. It's these mentor type of people who help them learn and become more. And in a way, my Obi-Wan Kenobi was MDMA. It wasn't a person per se that gave me that first experience. It was a chemical that I came into contact with, and then I was able to become more than I was. And then the next time, maybe it wasn't a drug, but maybe it was a person that helped me see the errors of my ways and helped me become more than I am. So that's kind of my experience of how the progress has happened in terms of growth and personal exploration. It has to do with the hero's journey.
So that person you're talking about is like one of your friends who is warning you about going too far with the drug business, or someone else?
Yeah, no, that you were correct, Kurt. That was that first person really that was in my life. That I don't want to get too much into an aside, but this person is no longer in my life. We kind of had a falling out, but at the time they were extremely influential on my thoughts. That I listened to them quite heavily. So when they would say I'm fucking up, maybe I need to right a certain wrong, or maybe I should try something else. They would inspire me to move that direction. So this person very much was a teacher, a mentor, a guru, and a close confidant.
Okay. Well, that's great to have someone like that in your life, even if it's only temporary, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty common, where all of us throughout our lives, we may come into contact with people who we become really close with, but for whatever reason, especially just the dynamism of life and constant change, that maybe we have a falling out, or that relationship's not compatible anymore. So we move on. That's just the way of things sometimes. Yes.
So, all right. So you're dealing all these drugs like MDMA and also cocaine. And how much do you think you were selling at the time?
So I was moving anywhere between 300 to 500 pills a month ish.
Wow.
So, and that's a lot for like a first or second level street dealer. When you're dealing a batch, you're not, I'm not the bulk dealer. I'm the person who's giving out 2 or 3 pills per person. Right. And sometimes I would travel to raves, the underground raves in the mid 2000s. And I would distribute the pills at the raves themselves. And that was a whole nother experience in itself, but that would also help me move more pills, of course, in a shorter amount of time, like maybe 100 or 200 in a night at a rave.
Right. Wow. That's a lot of profit. I imagine.
It was pretty nice.
And you did you say you had somebody even helping you who was selling for you?
So I had somebody who would basically act as a driver.
Uh-huh.
They would drive me around town, and then I would get out, and of course, and I would sell. And this person would also double as a kind of bodyguard.
Mm-hmm. I see.
So yeah.
So what happened eventually? Like you did get found out or busted, or attacked or something by the police. How did that happen?
Yeah, so everything, of course, like I said earlier, when you do this kind of stuff, it will catch up with you, which is unfortunate. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But yes, it did catch up to me. And the story kind of leads off when I told you about this friend, this mentor, this person warned me that I was getting out of hand, that I was losing control. And the last time they said this was in 2000, early 2009, late 2008. So I stopped what I was doing again, stopped dealing the drugs. But then 4 months later, my partner came back to me and said, "Hey, listen, I have some more drugs. Like I need to move these over the next, couple of months." It was approximately 500 pills, 36 grams of cocaine. And this individual said, could you hold these for me while I move them? I'll come here to your place intermittently to pick some up and then to make a delivery. So, and effectively I would get a deal off of that. So I didn't actually have to move the drugs, right? I would just hold them in my place.
Okay.
Kind of and the reason we do that is to obscure his movements if he has a place and the shit isn't stored at his place. But ended up being bad anyway. This is what happened. There was 1 week that I went on vacation, and right before I went on vacation, my business partner, like the day before, and this is kind of a choice that I made and one that I have to live with. He asked me if I was ready to move the stuff out of my house because it had been there already a couple months. So this is a couple months later after he came back to me. And I made the decision that I said, no, you can keep the stuff here a while longer. That ended up being a detrimental decision. The next day I left on vacation. While I was gone on vacation, my business partner took some cocaine, around 30 grams, and he attempted to sell that cocaine to an acquaintance of one of his associates. This acquaintance was an undercover narcotics agent that had already flipped his friend.
Oh.
So once he sold this cocaine to this undercover agent, the undercover agent then put tails on him, followed him all over town when he was dealing drugs, and learned about all the locations that he was returning to and the people that he was going to see. And it turned out, well, I'll get to this in a minute, but what happened in the moment effectively is after he sold to the undercover cop, the cops followed him back to my house. And the day after I came back from vacation, I believe I was gone for a week. Actually, at the time I went to Germany for vacation. I came back and it was the day after somebody knocked on the door to my house. I opened the door gradually and I looked out and I noticed that it would look like a repairman. It was a person in a blue overalls. And when I opened the door, I said, "Yeah, I'm with house management. Looks like there's an AC problem." And he was telling me this. I had the door cracked, and then all of a sudden he started pushing the door in. All this happened very quickly, like forcefully pushing the door in, and I kind of tried to hold it back. Right around that same time, I heard the pitter patter and the clip clap and the bounce boots coming up the stairs of my house. It was kind of like an apartment complex house. And the next thing I know, I was thrown onto the ground. And I heard, "Please, please, freeze, freeze. This is a raid. This is a state police." So I was subdued on the ground with a gun to my head. And then men in full riot gear with AR-15s swept through my house. And then they left, and I was sitting there. And then at that point, they said, okay, do you have any drugs on you? And I said, and of course, at the time I was terrified and I was filled with adrenaline. So I said, yes. By the way, in retrospect, never a good thing to ever speak to the police, no matter what the context is. Never tell them what you have, what you might not have. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. They can use shit against you in court later on. What you say. So
and even if you're completely innocent, it normally doesn't.
That's correct. So anyway, that little aside. I showed them where the box was in my house because I guess at the time I assumed that they already knew or they wouldn't have been there. And I mean either way, in reality, either way, I was probably fucked. So anyway, they got the drugs were in a fire safe box, and what they did at that point in time was they put the crowbar. They got a crowbar down from their car, and just to paint a picture, these were all mainly plain clothes, like state marshals and state agencies, state police. And there was probably like 6 or 7 at one time in my house, which wasn't that big, so it was rather crowded. So they take this crowbar and they popped open the safe because they asked me if I had the key. I told them I do not have a key for that. So they opened it up and then they dumped all the contents on the ground. And I just remember it being like a kaleidoscopic rainbow of pills and powders that just poured out of the safe. Because I remember at the time I had a bunch of specialized MDMA tablets. They were there were Simpsons themed ones. So there was like a Bart Simpson and a Homer Simpson and a Marge Simpson, red, yellow, and blue pill. They were actually very powerful MDMA tablets, just FYI. So they all rolled out, and I also saw that there was a bag of cocaine in there. To be completely honest, though, I did not know. I honestly had no clue exactly what was in that box. I knew that there were a lot of drugs, but since I wasn't managing it, I didn't need to know exactly what was in there, right?
Sure.
So there ended up. I remember thinking to myself at the time, I hope there's not a shit ton of drugs in there. Of course, they open it up and there's a shit ton of drugs in there. And I remember the first thing I thought is like, oh, fuck, I am really fucked. Like, I'm going to prison. That's the first thought. Like, I'm going to prison for a long time. You don't get out of, in Texas, having 30 plus grams of coke and 500 pills of MDMA. So I thought, fuck, this is game over. Anyway, at the time, the police, now they started asking me questions. They said, does this belong to you? I said, no, it doesn't. Like, now I'm finally starting to think like I don't need to be like admitting to anything. And they said, this is going to be 40 years in prison for you, son. You're going in and that's it. So why don't you tell us more about who this belongs to? And I'm like, no, I don't feel the need to talk anymore about this to you. And then I remembered like being so fueled up on adrenaline. I was telling them, what you guys are doing to me right now is fucking wrong. Do you guys not recall? And I remember saying this, do you guys not recall prohibition in the 20s with alcohol prohibition, how much that was filled, and all the cops that were arresting people for doing nothing wrong simply for having booze. And
what did they were think like, of that?
Yeah, they said, they basically at some time they said, I need to shut the fuck up.
You're making me feel bad, man.
Yeah, they tried to argue a little bit. They were trying to say, well, this is the law and we're just doing our job. So that's not really an argument. That's just them saying that they're the law and they can do what they can hurt who they want to do so long as it's in a quote unquote legal context. And I remember, do you remember Nazi Germany, bro? That was what they did to the Jews was in a legal context. Does that make it okay? This is an analogous situation, right? I'm not doing anything to hurt anybody. What you're doing to me is wrong. You're accosting me. You're stealing my product, and now you're about to kidnap me. That's the actual narrative of what happened, not that I'm being arrested for doing something morally horrendous. In reality, what they did was morally horrendous. But with that said, in the context of the society we live in, I made some decisions that led to this happening. So, and I understand that I made decisions that led to this, but I would still never take any of it back. I want to make that very clear. I would never take anything back what happened, because in the context of the hero's journey, all this that happened to me has made me a more complete person, and it has provided me more understanding of the system that we live in, and has given me context of my personal life and its meaning. So that's that. I should definitely continue the story though. So after they got all the drugs, they at that point then read me my rights and said I'm under arrest for not only possession of the drugs, for intent to deliver, and for manufacture. I indeed did not manufacture any drugs, but they claimed that at the time they claimed that I was manufacturing drugs and slapped me with a manufacturing charge.
On what grounds? I mean, did they have any evidence in that? Or?
No, I didn't have any equipment to manufacture anything. I was planning to grow mushrooms, so I had mushroom growing equipment in my house, but I hadn't started that process. So it was just a bunch of shit you buy from the store, basically.
Okay. So I have read that sometimes they'll try to trump up the charge sheet so it looks really bad, and then the prosecutor can come to you and say, well, it looks like you're looking at 50 years here, so why don't we talk about a deal? Or the police will put some pressure on you to try to get you to become an informant, or
Right. At the time, they tried to ask me some questions and stuff, but they didn't really push too hard because I told them that I'm not doing any kind of talking. But we'll get to that. So they never did do that to me, and there's a reason for that, and I'll get to it. So they took me to jail. They issued a bond for, I think it ended up being what ended up having to be paid was $7,000, and the total bill was like double that, like 14 to 20K, but a percentage of it could be paid, and then the rest could be handled later at the court date, something of that nature. So I paid. It was actually my family who bailed me out. They put up the bond. Thank goodness, or I would have been in jail for no telling how long.
Yes.
Because, and here's the thing, and we're going to discuss more about this, but it took a year to go to court. And this is pretty common no matter where you're at.
Wow.
In the United States. It takes a year for a charge that's this large to go to court, because the courts are all filled up. They're all overfilled and brimming because of the drug war. So I had to wait a whole year. Imagine this, with this hanging over my head and not knowing exactly what's going to happen. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen to me until about a year and a month, or a year and 2 months after the fact. Now, what I had to do, there was some good news, or a silver lining to this. I was arrested in a smaller town, and in this smaller town, there was easy to get an attorney who is really good, but who is also buddies with the DEA. No, sorry, not the DEA, the DA, the district attorney.
Oh, okay.
So that's what I did. I hired an attorney that was really good and really, and obviously was not inexpensive. Right after the legal bills, after the hiring of the attorney, it was quite costly. And the attorney said, when I spoke to the attorney the first time, I was terrified. I was crying. I was like, I know I fucked up. Am I going to have to go to prison for this? And the very first thing the attorney said is like, I don't know that I see prison in this. Have you done anything wrong before? Had to have any kind of record? Said, nope, I don't. He said, well, I think it's possible that I can arrange some kind of a probationary period. And wow. I said, I know this is a lot, even for this amount. And he said, I think that I can probably help you out even with this amount. He said, I don't know that I see prison time in this.
Wow.
I said, well, thank God. So he did tell me right away. He didn't make any promises, but he told me that he doesn't see prison time in this. And this is a lot of drugs. So that's a good thing. And I think it's very likely that he said this, yes, because I didn't have a charge, but also because he knew he had connections that could help argue this down. But here's what ended up happening. After that, I had, of course, a ton of different meetings with him. There was a bunch of legal stuff that had to be worked out. And then, of course, he started talking to the DA to make a deal. Well, get this. I was arrested in March of 2009. I remember on the 23rd. I almost remember the exact date because it was in traumatic experiences. The victim can usually remember the exact time, place, and a lot of the details. So it was March 2009. And then in December of the same year, December 2009, there was a knock on the door, and this is a part of the story I haven't explained a lot because it makes the story much longer. There was a knock on my door, long story short, the cops came back to my house again. The 3 plainclothes officers who work for the state drug task force came to my door, and they said, "You're under arrest." And I said, "What am I under arrest for?" I said, "You're under arrest for engaging in organized criminal activity." So what are you talking about? I've already been arrested for this. I didn't commit any other crimes. And anyway, they said, "We're not going to argue with you or talk to you. You can get your attorney and handle it. You're under arrest and you're coming with us." So I was arrested again, taken in and put in jail again, this time for a $10,000 bond for engaging in here's what I learned happened. Because the drugs that were in my house at some point in the past traveled through a different county than the county I lived in. So because that county knew the drugs had been through their county, and one of their undercover officers knew that, they slapped me with a charge based on a thought crime. Basically, the fact that drugs had been through there, not because I personally moved them through there or had anything to do with it. So this was their way of pulling a double jeopardy charge against me. So now I'm really thinking I'm fucked. Like, now I have organized. Now they're basically calling me a drug lord or crime lord,
mafia don.
Yep, in this county, and then I also still have these charges for manufacturing and delivering and possession with intent to deliver. So now I've got like all these charges racked up against me, and this was already. I had a lot of stress. I was trying to deal with the trauma. I had a lot of sleepless nights leading up to this point. A lot of crying, a lot of self-explanations, a lot of explanations to family members, a lot of arguing and debating because I told my family I don't believe I did anything wrong. And they said, "Where the hell did you come up with these ideas, Sterlin? This is why you're in the situation you're in." Like, I was definitely not considered the victim in the eyes of friends and family. In their mind, I had just made a stupid mistake based on my bad ideas.
Right.
So, anyway.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that after being deported from Mexico. It was like, well, a lot of people were on my side, like, well, why would they do that? Like, you weren't hurting anybody. But especially Mexicans. A lot of Mexicans were on my side. Some members of my family, not so much. I mean, luckily they weren't so harsh to me about it. But but yeah, I can see, I can relate to that a little bit.
Yeah, it was tough times, brother. And yeah, I'm glad you can relate to it because, when you go through stuff like that, it's not just an experience. It's really a traumatic experience. It's just not characterized like that in society because people like us are seen as either criminal or unlawful. Yes. And it's simplified as we're being arrested and taken to jail for what we committed. So it's characterized in this sort of bureaucratic, legalistic talk. But the reality is a human was attacked or harmed and kidnapped and accosted and then taken to a cage, held for ransom in that cage. And then after the ransom was paid, that person was... And when someone thinks about it in this context, suddenly their emotional worlds become more clear. It's not that the dehumanizing factor is left out of it. And now it's real to people if explained in this context. And this is how I've explained it to people. I wasn't just arrested and taken to jail because I was a criminal. I was kidnapped by kidnappers, and then I was held for ransom for going against the political climate.
Yes. You hadn't hurt anybody. What you were doing is engaging in business, basically. But what does it feel like, or what did it feel like for you to be in a cage?
I remember mainly confusion and terror were the two primary feelings. I was confused because I thought, I don't understand this world, this prison environment. I don't know when I'm going to get out. I have no idea what life is like in here and how long I'm going to be here. So I was totally sort of beside myself. Almost a sense of depersonalization came over me when I was in there. I remember initially they held me in this is both times I got arrested, really. They initially held me in like a holding cell. And I remember sitting there for like an hour, just waiting, just by myself, wondering what's going to happen and what all these processes are and what this environment is like. I already felt highly dehumanized because I was being treated like shit. You are treated as a sort of subhuman species when you go to jail. And, there are some people who are legitimately do things to harm others who I don't feel bad for necessarily when they get treated like this. But I do think that even people who commit some of the worst or most heinous crimes, there's still an element of humanness that needs to be taken into account because
yes,
what ultimately has to happen is that the victim needs to be made whole. It doesn't mean we have to punish or we have to condemn the person who committed the wrong. The victim just needs to be made whole. That's my opinion on the.
Yes. Well, my perspective is also like, all right, so if somebody's done a horrible crime and hurt somebody else, and then what normally happens that person is put in a cage and dehumanized. Well, if you want the best opportunity to make that person, to make that criminal actually a full human again, the best opportunity would actually be to treat them like a human, even if you have to deprive them of some liberty, but actually treat them with respect.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with that as well. And we're assuming this is even potentially the worst of the worst people, that because having a society built around punishment and is really a society built around revenge. Yes. And these are the kinds of societies that actually end up manufacturing more criminals because of the effect that it has on people in general, I think.
Yes.
But yeah, I remember feeling totally confused and totally out of my element and terrified and was wondering what was going to happen to me. So it was a tumultuous time, to say the least, and I really felt like I was closed in and I was never going to get out of that situation. So a feeling of hopelessness was also pervasive.
Yeah, it's like you never know. You could be there forever, or like is this your life now? And maybe you're starting to be resigned to that.
Yep, and luckily I was only in there the first time for I believe 2 days, and then the second time I was only in there 1 day. So my family reacted very quickly to get me out, and I'm thankful for that.
Yes.
But I still also I do harbor some resentment still at the fact that some people in my family still see me as a person who made a mistake. And still in retrospect, I don't see that I made any mistake aside from knowing that the rules of this society we live in are rules that are morally heinous and are anti-humanitarian.
Yes.
What was that? So I feel like I was a victim, although I try not to harbor a victim mentality. Instead, I've channeled that energy into condemning the system and helping more people wake up to it. So in the least, we can eventually abolish the drug war, which has caused some of the most harm in society in terms of these kinds of incidents.
Yeah. So, well, I think about it like in terms of a tactical mistake versus a moral mistake. Like the mistake you made, maybe was, I don't know, having the drugs in your house at that time, or, trusting someone a little too much or something like that. But it's not a moral mistake. It's not a moral failing. There's no evil involved.
Right. I really like the way that you worded that, a tactical mistake or a tactical error. I never thought of it like that before. Good point.
So then you have this $10,000 bond, and did your family pay that as well, or what happened?
Yeah, so my family also paid for that, or more precisely, that it was somebody who was close to me and who was family at the time, or I considered family, paid for it. Correct.
So you managed to get some freedom again, at least for a while?
Yes, I did manage to get some freedom again. I was, of course, after the fact, now, like I mentioned, I thought I was really, really done for. But luckily, I didn't have to live in complete terror for much longer, because after that time I was arrested, my court date came up in 2 months after that, finally. And right before my court date, like a couple of weeks beforehand, my attorney discussed a deal. And I don't want to get too much into the weeds of this, but I will mention that because this other charge happened in a different county, I had to get an attorney in that county as well. But what ended up happening was my attorneys, I had 2 attorneys now, and they got my charges to run concurrently, meaning all together as one, even though it was charges from both counties. Since they were related to the same crime, they got them to run together concurrently. So, and that ended up being a good thing, because now they could figure out a deal to make for all the charges lopped together or brought together into one. They ended up taking off, by the way, the manufacturing charge. They removed that charge. So all I ended up being charged for was criminal organization and a possession charge.
Okay. Just a little organized crime. That's all they had on you.
Yeah, that's no big deal, right? No, it was actually possession with intent to deliver and engaging in organized crime. So what they ended up working out was that we run that concurrently. And at first, the DA offered me a deal after the attorneys started speaking with him, offered me a deal for 8 years deferred adjudication probation. And then, but my attorney said, let's wait. Let's actually see what all they have on you. We may be able to talk them down more. Right away, when my attorney said that to them, they said, okay, the next time we're going to offer you, it's going to be 10 years deferred adjudication. And if you fight that, we're going to shoot for jail time. So at that point, my attorney was like, I don't think they're bluffing. Then we had the discovery phase. And here's what ended up coming out of this, Kurt. They had been following the guy that I was friends with, my business partner, for nearly 10 years. Wow. They had a gigantic book of a prolonged investigation over the course of 10 years that had listed at least 14 people as part of this organized crime case that they were building. So, and this was alongside the fact that I was arrested. There were like 5 or 6 other people arrested alongside me on the same day or very close to that same day who were involved as well. So it was like a joint effort from multiple agencies within the state. So they arrested all these people and brought them in on these organized crime charges. And this investigation has been underway for 8 years. So this person that I was friends with before I even met him was already selling to undercover agents.
Whoa.
At first, I thought that it was just recently that happened. Like he had just recently sold to an undercover. No, this had been ongoing for a very long time. And I still have the paperwork with the whole thing. I save it for a scrapbook or something later. But here's the deal. One of the reasons I was able to really argue a point is because they had, on this big list of people they had, I was the very bottom of the list. I was
okay.
Like,
so you were supposed to be the pawn in this organization, or how do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I was like not in, like some people's names on there were they were caught doing multiple things, like at different occasions selling drugs. The only time that I was caught with anything was during the raid, and then the alleged charge that they worked out in the other county for the engaging in organized crime. Whereas like the people on the top of the list had been doing things for years that they had documented and logged as evidence. So the main person involved, whose name, of course, I will keep for personal protection, the person ended up getting, I think he ended up getting 10 or 15 years in prison. So that happened. And I don't know what all happened to the rest of the people. I think a bunch of them ended up getting some kind of probationary sentence as well. A couple of them did go to prison, though, who were engaged in this network. But I think some of them had also had priors as well related to the same kind of stuff, same kind of charges. So, but this was a huge, even after I got on, ended up getting probation, overcoming this, what happened to me psychologically was tremendously difficult because And not only was it like I needed to overcome the trauma of what happened and realize that I can still function and be, not have flashbacks and like suffer the PTSD of the whole thing. But I also, during this whole experience, we've been talking about the ideas alongside what's happened. I came to terms with the fact that I'm an anarchist or a voluntarist because I knew what I did had not been wrong, but the direct experience had highly turned me on to the full problem with the state and with the criminal justice system. And I learned how corrupt and how broken and how sick this whole system is, and how predatory it is for certain segments and classes in society. So I knew right away that this was going to inspire me to become a kind of activist, to fight back against this whole system and to do what I can to help put an end to their dastardly schemes, and to figure out ways where we can have more freedom in society and people can do what they can do without being tormented and harmed and kidnapped by these forces that consider themselves good, which are really not good, but are actually agents of evil, or at least they may not realize that and knowingly, but what the ends that they're trying to achieve for certain classes of society, namely the politicians, are ultimately reprehensible and vile.
Well, this is interesting. This kind of a similar thing came up in another interview that I did with my friend Alfredo Romero about when he was wronged in a business deal, and he kind of similarly, he was like, well, what am I going to do? He was, bitter or something about it, and he decided to become an activist, and it's like trying to find a problem that's bigger than himself, I guess you might say. So it's like through that process, it helps you heal from the trauma. How do you think that works?
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. I don't know that I've thought about it precisely like that, but that makes sense in retrospect, because becoming this activist and really providing myself with this framework for understanding reality and understanding the system has also helped me forgive myself for the tactical mistakes that I made, as you put it. Knowing with 100% certainty that I did not do anything evil or wrong or bad, and that I'm only characterized by society in this light, really allowed me to understand that the people involved are just part of this system that's broken. And what they did, they honestly did believe was their job, even though it was wrong. And just the knowledge of these facts have really helped me overcome the trauma of experiencing all of these things that happened. And now it just is a real tragedy to me to think that these police officers, these law enforcement agencies, are going about harming people en masse, and their mindset is to characterize these people as evil that they're arresting, when in reality, they're the monsters, or they're the ones that are committing the crimes. And the fact that they don't understand that that's what they're doing yet, at least most of them don't, or they're and this is true of some of them, maybe most of them, they're complete sociopaths and they don't really care either way. But knowing this has helped me heal as an individual. It's helped me realize that I can continue to move forward with my life. Also knowing that I'm not going to prison, helped in that process. So it was really in all of these things coalesced together to help me heal and to help me move forward in life.
So with the trauma, I'll ask you again, is there a bodily feeling? Is there something like do you feel some kind of disgust, or is it like an ongoing hurt inside you, like heartbreak, or what is it like to feel trauma? Yeah,
for me, it's just a feeling of anger, I think. If it's and it just feels like it reverberates through me, and I still do, I recall the anger, and I've often used writing as an outlet for that anger, or speaking, public speaking.
Sorry, did you say writing or rioting?
Writing.
Okay.
Right? Not yet. No.
Yeah.
Writing as an outlet for that anger. Explaining what happened to me and telling the truth has become an outlet. But that's how I think I feel it bodily. It kind of comes across as anger and me wanting to find something to lash out to. And of course, it was way worse in the beginning when it was more palpable, when it was more close to home and the trauma was fresh. At that point in time, I was writing a whole lot, and I had to journal a whole lot too to get this stuff out of my system, because it's the only way I knew that I could fight back or also find a way to find myself was through the creativity of writing, and also beginning to engage in an early form of activism. So just raw anger, rage, and almost a terrible trembling and shaking, and this feeling of pure loathing oftentimes came over me. And that's the best way that I can describe it. And I think that's if we look at some of the anarchist and voluntarist communities, I know that a lot of other people have found their path as a result of their interactions with the state and their feelings of disgust for the state. And I think they channel their trauma similarly. First, it starts as anger, and then that anger gets transferred into being vocal about what's happened, because it's a safe way, honestly, or a safer way to negotiate that anger or to deal with it and to cope.
Well, you are known as the relational anarchist, or there's that community on Facebook. I think it's called Compassionate Anarchy, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So how do you bridge that gap, like from becoming this angry voluntarist to thinking about compassionate anarchy? How do you get there?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yeah, of course, I didn't always, the relational anarchist thing was later, way after all of this stuff happened. So of course, and this is a good point, because it shows how the process of healing trauma had cropped up in me, and how it had turned into or morphed into this more compassionate or relational anarchist perspective. And it was just a process, I think, Kurt. It just took time and thinking about the ideas, and also one point was me looking back on some of my older like Facebook posts and my old journal writings, and realizing that, man, I really was mad. And you can still see it sometimes, even today. It's not always easy to control being angry at this world that we're born into and the systematic nastiness. But then I realized that the more compassionate we can be, the more relational we can be, and the more we can focus on telling our stories and not just being angry, is a way that we can help heal ourselves and also heal the world as well. So that's how the transition really cropped up. It was just through the process of ventilating through writing, and looking back on that writing, and thinking back on that writing, and thinking back on that thinking, and moving on into a position in life where I can not only heal, but I can also spread my healing through the process of love and connecting with other people on a profoundly deep level. And that's part of how relational anarchy came up. Besides the fact that I had studied psychology while I was going through all of these experiences, I was still in school working on getting my bachelor's degree, did eventually get my bachelor's degree in psychology. So I was already influenced a lot by the healing arts and the psychological and counseling communities.
Right.
So really all of that stuff came together and allowed me to create these ideas and to just continue to push forward and continue to heal and help heal.
Yes. Well, just in case people in the audience are wondering, so with the compassionate anarchy, the relational anarchy, it's kind of like, if we can set an example through our actions and show empathy and compassion for other people, then we can directly create a better world with the people around us. That's the idea, right?
Yes, that is actually what I've called the relationalist ethic. It's this idea that if we can spread more compassion and explore more of our relationships with other people, even if we don't necessarily know those people, if we try to connect with them in certain ways, leverage and we talked a little bit about this before, but nonviolent communication, basically getting an understanding or a feel for other people's needs. What that means is we're automatically moving away from violence or eschewing violence, so that we can embrace more of a connective state of mind, more of an I-thou relationship, as Martin Buber called it. And that, because that is antithetical to violence, means that we are naturally or de facto creating an anarchistic society. If we do this on a grand scale, right? Because having compassion is antithetical to being angry and violent, right? If you have a compassionate mindset, by virtue of that mindset, you're not angry or violent. So the more compassion we harbor and can muster up for other people, the more towards anarchy that we move. That's the relationalist ethic, which is outside the scope of the logical and the economic and moral trajectories of anarchist thought that have been pervasive over the last couple of decades.
Yeah. Let me ask you, when going through that, studying to learn to be a psychologist, and you were processing your anger through that time, were there any particular techniques that you learned for processing your anger or letting go of your anger, or anything that you discovered personally about that?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I've been more inspired by one of them is the humanistic school of thought, which was really pioneered by a therapist named Carl Rogers, and to some degree Abraham Maslow. And their form of therapy is called human-centric, and it's just the idea that if you are try to connect with people more and try to relate with people more, by virtue of that, you're also healing yourself. You're also being able to find common ground with those folks. And people on the receiving end of humanistic therapy are more likely to open up to others and to discuss their problems and to create a therapeutic alliance where some actual healing can happen. So I was been super inspired by that, because it's been a component piece to the relationalist movement. I think if we're being human-centric in general to others as often as possible, we're also, again, creating the kind of world that we want to live in, where, and this is an important point to make, where we can help break down the nation state. Because what the nation state is, from a psychological perspective, it's a cold bureaucracy. In other words, everything that happens within the context of government or the nation state is bureaucratic, meaning that there's no emotional context at play for the decisions that are made. The decisions are made on a legal premise or based on some kind of rule or administrative detail, as Nabokov would have said. So what that means is, because the nation state is effectively exists because we have been pushing out all the compassion in society, and this is from a parental level up. The parents, parenting is almost wholly an abusive endeavor because of the prevalence of spanking and hitting children and pushing children's emotional circuitry out of the equation. Subduing those emotions has ultimately led to the creation of a cold, bureaucratic society. And it's my theory that governments have mainly cropped up as a result of the way that people treat their children and the way that people have learned to handle their emotions, which is effectively non-existent. And this is exactly why nation states have no emotional context, and why people can so easily, especially government enforcers, can say, I'm just doing my job,
right?
Because it takes the emotion out of that equation. Like if they kill somebody and they say, I'm just doing my job and following orders, they don't have to experience the emotional side effects or the emotional pain of that. So in order to have a society that's based on a totalitarian regime, emotional concern and care and love cannot be a component of that. So this is another reason why I think the relational piece of anarchy is so important, because once we start trying to connect with people, we're naturally diminishing the impact of bureaucracies, which are cold and detached and emotionless by virtue of what they are.
Yeah, I see. Okay. So, so all that just from processing your own anger.
Yes, it all came out of processing my own anger and my own just detachment from, or depersonalization from, having to deal with all that trauma, plus all the family member material, etc. And for anybody who's interested, like if you're suffering from trauma, I really recommend getting out creative outlets to help process that material, like writing or doing some type of artwork. That kind of stuff really helps with the trauma. And if you really need it, counseling, psychedelic use, etc., any of that stuff can help as well. Just tackle it in your own way and deal with it in your own time, and try to go easy on yourself. That's how I was able to overcome my trauma and my difficulties. And I'm not going to say I've completely overcame everything. There's a lot of things I've had to deal with, and a lot of times I've had interactions with the state, run into it. I just have to remember this is the world that we live in. But it does offer opportunities for us to not only enter into the hero's journey, but it also offers opportunities for us to try to heal the world and try to help people embrace ideas that are not as sociopathic, not as violent, and anti-emotional.
Yes, yes. Well, I like what you said. You brought up Carl Rogers and Maslow there. I just finished reading On Becoming a Person. It took me some months actually to finish this book. It gets a bit dense at times, but it's a beautiful book actually. The times when he describes the moments of therapy, I thought so many times, hang on, he's actually describing a spiritual experience. It's like a scientist describing a spiritual experience. So it's a very interesting book.
Yes. I haven't read the book myself, but I have read a lot, of course, about Carl Rogers because I had to while I was studying counseling psychology. And I did read part of that and some of his other material and articles he wrote. And yes, I get the vibe that part of coming into yourself as a human being is kind of a spiritual experience, because it requires you to not only introspect on a deep level, but also kind of enjoy your existence as a human being. And really, to me, that is the crux of spirituality. If you can revel in this existence and the mystery of life, you're really engaging in a kind of spiritual existence. And it's an amazing thing. And that's been a component to my life as well. And I'm glad you mentioned that. I really consider myself an atheist in the sense that I don't know that there's one like monotheistic creator, or even a creator of the universe per se, but I do acknowledge that there are a lot of mysteries, and there's anything could be possible in terms of our existence, and I think that's definitely worth exploring, but it's also worth accepting and understanding.
Yes. Here's a question for you. Going through all this experience, I guess you said in the end you didn't regret any of it. Do you think, in a way, like it's kind of a cliche, but people say everything happens for a reason? Do you think that's the case in your story?
That's an interesting thing to say, Kurt. This is a question of like destiny or fate, maybe, right? Like, if everything happens for a reason, what that implies is that maybe we're headed towards something specific, or there's some kind of destiny. And I don't know about that. I don't want to say with any kind of certainty. I've often taken a more of a scientific approach, in the sense that I work with the evidence that's in front of me. And but by the same token, because I don't have all the answers and I don't have all the truths, I do like the idea that maybe there's a possibility that some things do happen for a reason, maybe even if it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, in the sense that we put ourselves down these paths in a way on purpose so that we can become more than who we are. So I think that's a nice mixture of the scientific perspective that there are statistical anomalies that just happen and coincidences, but then there's also purposeful, almost teleological things that happen to us because we set those things in motion as it's like attempting to be authors of our own destiny. And I do think we can control some of that, because we have the power to make decisions and choices, and those choices ultimately affect where we go in life. And sometimes those choices involve risk. And I think to do anything in life, whether it's to become a successful entrepreneur and make billions of dollars, or it's to become a spiritual guru who is everyone looks up to as a person who has found themselves, no matter what your destiny is, so to speak, you ultimately make the decisions that put yourself in a position to learn about that process and then to become what you're meant to become in that sense.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Oh yeah, I guess we can finish there. Or is there anything else you want to say? Maybe you want to promote your projects quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do need to make it very clear that, last time you guys, I mentioned my website, sterlinlujan.com. That's good to go to that. My Facebook page is Sterlin Lujan. You can easily find me. I'm also on Float now, the Float app at Sterlin Lujan. But here's the real thing that I want to talk about. Cool. I am on the cusp of releasing my first book. It's been a 3-year project in the making. It is a fairly long book. It's a collected works, but it has all my relational material in it. It's the first time it's been collected together in an organized fashion. And I'm hoping to release it at the quarter of next year. I've gotten to the habit of where I'm not making promises anymore because I thought this was going to be done a long time ago, since it's been going on for 3 years. But of course, it ended up being more of a process than I had expected it to be. But of course, when you're putting together a book, and especially one, this is 120,000 words. So it's not just a small book. It's a nice, like almost a half a lifetime of thoughts, effectively.
Yeah, that's like the size of three novels or so.
Yeah, it's definitely in that range. But I'm hoping to have that released soon. So I'll be interested. I already know I have people that are interested in picking up a copy, and I'm hoping that I can promote it more. When the time comes, I will let you guys know to check my website out, sterlinlujan.com. I'm going to promote it on there and hopefully have a sign up for people who want to purchase it, etc. I'll be setting up a web page anyway, but keep track of my Facebook and my website for more information.
Great. Do you have a title for the book?
Yes, it's called Dignity and Decency, Rhapsodic Musings of a Modern Anarchist.
Okay, great. All right.
Yep.
Thanks, Sterlin. Thanks for coming along. Thanks for sharing your hero's journey there and giving some wisdom.
Absolutely, Kurt. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate the work that you do, and you're a treasure for this community, brother. So anything you need from me, just let me know, and keep pushing forward.
Thanks, man.
A beautiful thought.
Thanks for listening. So in that interview, in that story, you could hear that Sterlin was victimized. Well, maybe some people wouldn't share his perspective, but certainly he was behaving peacefully and he was attacked. People who did not behave peacefully. As a result, he was traumatized, being locked into a cage. Not a pleasant experience, I can tell you. So here's the thing. Sterlin decided to take that experience, and instead of holding a grudge or becoming bitter, getting just angry at the state and holding on to that, angry at the state of the world, he decided to take it and somehow use it as leverage over himself for transformation, to become even more beautiful, to go deeper into himself, and find something special, continue to transform in loving glory. Now, perhaps if we take a moment, we might think about some grudge or some bitterness, some anger or rancor that we hold on to, something that still lurks a little bit within our belly, within our heart. What is it? How could we take that and move forward in loving power? Moving forward through our transformational ability, our blessing as human beings to transform, we might say, transform rubbish into gold. Using that personal alchemy, how can we take what was once ugly and create something beautiful? Just as many artists have done, harnessing the past and creating a better future. Thanks for listening. Remember to check out SterlinLujan.com and keep an eye out for Sterlin's book that he mentioned there. Also check out beautifulpodcast.com. If you are experiencing some kind of mental anguish, maybe you've been traumatized yourself in some form, victimized by the state or somebody else, maybe you're in a difficult spot and maybe you could use a little help getting out of there. So if you head on over to beautifulpodcast.com, you see at the top, you got the link there for CBT sessions with me using techniques, cognitive behavioral techniques. We can explore what's going on with you. I will listen to you, do my best to understand you as profoundly as possible, and try to ask you questions to present alternative perspectives. So you don't necessarily need to be bound by the past and bound by your own beliefs, but see things just as Sterlin learned to see things in a more beautiful way, in a more empowering way, and move forward into something more wonderful. Beautifulpodcast.com, that's one site. SterlinLujan.com, that's another. And most importantly, have a wonderful day.
You